At 3 in the morning on December 15, 1836, a building in Washington, D.C. collapsed in under 20 minutes. Inside it, every patent ever filed in the United States of America. Every single one. From the very first patent authorized by President George Washington in 1790, 46 years of American invention, to the last drawing submitted that same week, nearly 10,000 patents, 9,000 engineering drawings, 7,000 physical working models, hand-built by the inventors themselves, of machines and processes and devices that had never existed anywhere on Earth before they were conceived. All of it gone before sunrise. When Congress tried to rebuild the record, when they published emergency notices begging inventors to come forward and resubmit their original documents, only 2,845 ever responded. The other 7,000-plus inventions were never reconstructed. Their creators had died, or moved, or had no surviving copies. Or something else. Of those lost inventions, we know the name of almost nothing. That is the question nobody has answered in 188 years. The thing about a pattern is that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. To understand what burned on December 15, 1836, you must understand what a patent in 1836 actually was. It was not a form, not a filing number in a database. Under the laws governing the Young Patent Office, every application required the inventor to submit a working physical model, a hand-built, functional miniature of the device itself. These models were displayed in the Patent Office's public gallery, where citizens came to witness the mechanical ingenuity of a country still building itself from nothing. 7,000 of those models existed in Blodgett's Hotel on the night of December 14, 1836. Among them, Robert Fulton's original bound folio of full-color patent drawings, done in his own hand, detailing the machinery of the first commercially practical steamboat, a document signed by President James Madison and attested by the Secretary of State. Among them, working models of textile manufacturing processes that had driven the early American Industrial Revolution. Steam engine variants, agricultural mechanisms, mechanical systems that existed nowhere else in documented form. Senate Investigating Committee Chairman John Ruggles later reported the full accounting of what was destroyed. 168 folio volumes of records, 26 large portfolios containing 9,000 drawings, and the complete file histories of every patent granted across the preceding 46 years. Ruggles called it, on the record, the history of American invention for 50 years. In one night gone. Here is where the official story accumulates its questions. Blodgett's Hotel housed three tenants: the United States Patent Office, the United States Post Office, and the Washington Fire Department. A firehouse, a fire engine, and 1,000 feet of riveted leather hose, all purchased by Act of Congress 16 years earlier, were stationed in the very same building as the most irreplaceable document collection in the country. Congress had been explicitly aware of the fire risk for decades. During the War of 1812, Patent Office Superintendent Dr. William Thornton personally walked out to meet the invading British Army and pleaded with soldiers to spare the building. He convinced them. The Patent Office was the only government structure in Washington not put to the torch by the British. Thornton understood precisely what would be lost if it burned. Congress funded a fire engine specifically to protect it. They covered the roof in fireproof slate in 1820. They took the risk seriously. So what happened in the early hours of December 15th? Post office workers, wrapping up a long overnight shift, gathered ash from their stoves and stored it in a wooden ember box in the shared basement fuel room, directly alongside the Patent Office's firewood supply. Live embers in those ashes continued burning through the night, eventually igniting the wood, and from there, the building. When smoke was spotted around 3 a.m., citizens tried to respond. But the volunteer fire company specifically formed to operate the congressional fire engine had grown discouraged over the years and quietly disbanded. There were no trained firefighters available to operate the very equipment Congress had purchased for this exact emergency. The department's leather hose, purchased 16 years earlier, was old and defective and failed to direct water onto the flames. A bucket brigade proved useless against a blaze already consuming 3 stories of a wooden structure. The entire building collapsed in under 20 minutes. Post office employees, stored at the far end of the building, managed to save their own documents entirely. The patent office saved nothing, not one model, not one complete drawing, not one original filing. A single volume survived only because a patent office employee had taken it home without authorization the night before. One volume out of 168. A building that had survived a British military invasion, destroyed before breakfast by an ash box. And Congress opened an arson investigation immediately. Congress did not record the fire as a simple accident, not initially. The post office, which shared the building and whose overnight workers had placed the ash box, was, at that precise moment, under active congressional investigation for awarding fraudulent mail contracts. Congress was already experiencing unusual difficulty obtaining records from the post office related to that investigation when the fire occurred. The timing was, at a minimum, notable. The formal arson inquiry examined the post office specifically. Investigators considered it seriously enough to document the suspicion in the official record. The theory was ultimately closed, for one reason that is rarely quoted in full context. The post office employees had saved their own documents. If someone had deliberately started the fire to destroy incriminating postal records, they had failed, those records survived. And the patent office, which was under no investigation whatsoever, lost everything. This is the logic that ended the arson file. The wrong records burned. But here is what that logic leaves open. The patent archive that was destroyed represented 46 years of American technological development, with no copies held anywhere in the country. The Patent Office had operated since 1790 as a single-copy archive. No backup, no duplicate filings, no off-site storage. The physical models submitted by inventors were, in most cases, the only physical record of those inventions anywhere on Earth. By 1836, the United States was entering a period of explosive industrial expansion, a moment when the ability to verify, contest, and commercially build upon prior patents would become economically decisive for an emerging industrial class. A clean slate, considered from a certain perspective, was not without its beneficiaries. The question serious researchers sit with is not necessarily whether the fire was deliberately set. It is whether the conditions that guaranteed total destruction, a 46-year single-copy archive, a disbanded fire brigade, an ember box stored against a woodpile, were the product of decades of pure institutional negligence, or something more deliberate. What are the odds? After the fire, Congress passed an Emergency Act in March 1837, allocating $100,000 to reconstruct as much of the lost patent archive as possible. The Patent Office published urgent notices across the country asking inventors and their heirs to come forward with original correspondence, drawings, or any documentation that could allow a patent to be rebuilt. The reconstruction effort ran for a full decade, from 1837 to 1847. At the end of it, 2,845 patents had been restored. These were retroactively numbered and designated the expats, identified with the prefix X, to distinguish them from the numbered patents issued after the fire, which began fresh with patent number 1, awarded to Senate Committee Chairman John Ruggles for an improved railroad traction wheel. The expats that were reconstructed tell us something about the shape of what was in that building. Eli Whitney's cotton gin patent, originally issued in 1794, became X72. Robert Fulton's steamboat patents were eventually partially reconstructed years later through private family records and Naval Academy holdings. Early textile machinery, steam engine improvements, and agricultural designs were rebuilt from inventors who were still living, commercially active, and legally motivated to restore their rights. But over 7,000 patents were never reconstructed. 7,000 inventions, designed, built, physically modeled, and legally filed between 1790 and 1836, for which no documentation now exists anywhere in the public record. The historian of technology John Leonhard, writing for the University of Houston, described it plainly. Those missing patents were written when American invention was still on a near-blank slate, and they surely contained far more technological surprises than their successors. He asked the question directly: how much of what those 7,000 inventors conceived has simply been rediscovered and repatented in the 188 years since? We cannot know. The documentation is gone. But notice the pattern of who did not come forward. The inventors who reconstructed their patents were, nearly without exception, living, commercially active, and legally invested in protecting ongoing businesses. They had attorneys, correspondents, and business partners who held copies of patent correspondence. The 7,000 who never responded were disproportionately smaller inventors, rural craftsmen, independent tinkerers, early experimenters who had no commercial apparatus, no legal staff, and no financial incentive to spend months reconstructing records for an institution that had already lost their work once. Some were dead. Some had no surviving family. Some had no copies because the patent office was supposed to be the copy. What survived the fire, in other words, is not a random cross-section of American invention between 1790 and 1836. It is a commercially filtered cross-section, weighted toward the inventions of the already powerful. The rest burned and stayed burned. Here is where honest researchers must pause. The standard account of the 1836 fire is straightforward: institutional negligence, aging infrastructure, a disbanded fire company, and the ordinary human tendency to store combustibles near heat sources. Washington in 1836 was a half-constructed capital with minimal public services and no coherent fire safety culture. Bureaucratic complacency over 46 years allowed a single-copy archive to exist without any redundancy system whatsoever. This explanation carries genuine weight. It requires no conspiracy. It requires only what history shows routinely, that institutions fail to protect their most important things until after those things are gone. The negligence account also receives support from the 1837 congressional response. The urgency, the $100,000 appropriation, the decade-long reconstruction effort, these suggest an institution genuinely shocked by what it had failed to prevent, not one covering tracks. These are not trivial points. But the negligence account cannot fully explain one thing. The ex-patent records that were recovered, the USPTO's own archive, are searchable today. What they reveal is that even among the 2,845 reconstructed patents, historians have discovered technological achievements that upend conventional narratives. Samuel Morey, for instance, built and patented a working steamboat before Robert Fulton's famous venture, and tried to sell it to Fulton's financier. That patent survived in the X records. It rewrites the standard history of American steamboat technology. If that level of surprise exists in the patents we did recover, what existed in the 7,000 we didn't? That question has no answer, only the fire does. Here is the detail almost no summary includes. 41 years after the 1836 disaster, on September 24, 1877, the Patent Office burned again. This time, it burned in a purpose-built, fireproof building, a structure specifically commissioned and designed after 1836 precisely to prevent another catastrophic loss. Congress had funded it. Architects had engineered it. The entire premise of its construction was that the 1836 fire must never happen again. The building was fireproof. Its contents were not. The 1877 fire destroyed approximately 87,000 patent models, including the original working model of Eli Whitney's cotton gin, and damaged or destroyed over 600,000 photolithographic drawings. The cause was never definitively determined. The building's roof was constructed of wood. Flammable chemical fumes had accumulated in an upper wing. An early focal point of the fire was a storage room holding over 20,000 rejected models. Unlike 1836, no patents were permanently lost in 1877 because the documentation reforms enacted after the first fire had finally created a duplicate copy system. The records survived. The physical objects did not. Two fires, the same institution, the same pattern of protective systems that were present, funded, authorized, and inadequate. Nobody talks about both fires in the same breath. The pattern exists. Here is what the documented record leaves us with. In 1836, the United States lost every patent ever filed, 9,957 inventions, 7,000 physical models, 168 folio volumes, 9,000 drawings. In a building housing the fire department itself, in under 20 minutes, because a fire brigade had disbanded, and a wooden ember box sat against a woodpile. Congress investigated arson. The post office was under corruption investigation at the time. The records that burned belonged to the institution, not under investigation. The single-copy archive had never received a backup system across 46 years of documented fire risk. Of nearly 10,000 patents destroyed, only 2,845 were ever restored. The remaining 7,000-plus inventions have no public record. The USPTO acknowledges they may never be recovered. Some expats continue to surface in private archives. A number were discovered at Dartmouth College as recently as 2004. More may still exist in estate collections, family papers, and forgotten institutional holdings across the country. What was in those 7,000 files? What technologies, what processes, what early visions of a world being built from nothing? We will never fully know. The official story calls it an accident born of negligence. The documented record calls it the single largest destruction of intellectual property in American history, enabled by every layer of protection failing in sequence, on a single winter night, in a building that had once been saved from an invading army by one man who understood precisely what was inside it. That man was Dr. William Thornton. He died in 1828. 8 years later, everything he protected burned before anyone could stop it. What was in the 7,000 patents that nobody ever came to reclaim? That is a question worth sitting with.